Hi, listeners. This is Sheila, your host for the Communicate Influence podcast. This week, we're going to be discussing brand ambassador programs. Every brand ambassador program is different, but most of them use the passion of brand supporters by giving them the autonomy to carry the brand's message to consumers. They also enhance one of the most effective marketing tools a brand can use, word of mouth. My guest is journalist and author Peter Barron, who's based in Darlington, the north of England. After serving as editor of the regional newspaper The Northern Echo for 17 years, Pete set up his own media company in 2016. More recently, he became a brand ambassador for a financial institution called the Darlington Building Society. This episode is a bit longer than previous ones, and this is because I wanted to explore the reputation, qualities, and achievements necessary to make the role of brand ambassador a successful one. Before we start the conversation with Pete, here's a word from this week's sponsor, markgabberty.com. Do you want to increase your income? If so, you need Mark Gabberty's income spreadsheet. Mark's free income spreadsheet comes with places where you can fill in your income streams and list your expenses. This income spreadsheet makes it easy for you to track how you use your money, which is a big step towards financial freedom. To get your free income spreadsheet, you can head over to markgabberty.com/income-spreadsheet or join the Breakthrough Success Facebook group. And we'll include the sponsor link in the show notes. And now, let's connect with Pete Barron and talk about his role as a brand ambassador. Hi, Pete, and welcome very much to the podcast.
Hi, Sheila. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm great. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's great to connect after we worked together at the Northern Echo. I'm happy that we've stayed in touch, and I'm thrilled that you're able to be a guest on my podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. So you've had a really successful background, or sorry, I should say a really successful career in journalism. And you've got this new role as an ambassador for a financial institution in Darlington in the north of England. So first of all, can you tell us about your background, where you're from in the Northeast and your journalism career? And then we'll move into the role of ambassador, yeah?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, I grew up in a place called South Bank, which is a suburb of Middlesbrough. So Middlesbrough is a steel community in the northeast of England, probably about 30 miles from Newcastle. I grew up on a council estate, so my dad was a steel worker, my mum was the local post lady, and that's where I grew up. And most kids in that area, really, you either went into industry. That was the expectation. But I just decided that I wanted to be a writer, and I was inspired by a campaigning journalist from the Daily Mirror called John Pilger. And I went into journalism. I went to Darlington College, where they run a training college for journalists. Darlington's a market town, again in the northeast of England. It's the birthplace of the railways. That's what it's famous for. But it also became well known as a place to be trained as a journalist. So I went there as a young boy of 18, 19 to be trained as a journalist. And that's how I began.
That's great. And I have to ask this question, Pete. What did your parents say when you told them that you didn't want to follow the traditional path and that you wanted to be a journalist?
Well, I think in a place like Middlesbrough, there were quite low aspirations, really. And, you know, my dad wanted me to be a welder. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what a welder did, but it was all they knew. They just wanted something that they saw as secure, really. But and that was the steelworks. Well, it proved to be not secure because the community on Teesside has had a massive blow in the last few years. Thousands of jobs have been lost through the decline of the steel industry. And I suppose newspapers as well has gone through a decline as well. But, I just went in a different route. And I'm really glad I did, because I've had nearly 40 years in journalism now, and I've had a fascinating life. And I wouldn't have swapped it for anything.
Oh, that's great. And I mean, yours is, a truly magnificent story. You were so successful, as you said, You started off as an 18-year-old at college in Darlington. Tell listeners a little bit about your career with the eventually becoming editor of the Northern Echo and that paper's illustrious history as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started on a newspaper called the Scunthorpe Evening Telegraph because when you're a young journalist, you've got to be prepared to go anywhere in the country. And I applied for a trainee's job on the Scunthorpe Evening Telegraph. Now, Scunthorpe, again, is a steel town. Closer to the middle of the country in England, really. It's about 2 hours from Darlington, 2 hours south. But I started there and then I stayed down there for about 3 years, learning the profession. And I came to the Northern Echo in 1984 as a reporter. And I came to the Northern Echo because I wanted to come back home. I wanted to come back to the northeast of England. But also the Northern Echo had this incredible reputation as a campaigning newspaper, and that's what inspired me. I wanted to change the world, and I know it sounds a bit pompous, but I really did want to use the power of the press to make a difference. And I came to the Northern Echo because it had this incredible tradition of campaigning journalism, great editors. The most famous of all is probably Sir Harold Evans, who's now based in New York. But Sir Harold Evans is probably, I guess he's the most famous living journalist of all. And he was the editor of the Northern Echo in the 1960s. And he changed the world. He, for example, he made cervical cancer testing part of the National Health Service in this country while he was editor of the Northern Echo. He saw that there was this need for women to have the right to that test as part of the NHS, and he fought for it, and it became part of women's expectations of their health service in this country. So that was just one of many examples of what he did through the power of the press and as editor of the Northern Echo, and it was that I wanted to come and be part of.
I mean, that makes sense. And you talked about, the fact that it must sound pompous wanting to change the world, but don't you think that a lot of young journalists feel like that?
I hope so. And my big worry now, the way things are going, there are some fantastic young journalists out there, and I'm sure that they have the same burning passion for campaigning and investigative journalism that brought me into the profession. My fear for them is that there is so much pressure now on, what we all call in the industry clickbait, which is, how many clicks their stories are going to get online, and that's how they're being judged. And I think there's a real danger that we lose the focus on campaigning, and I really hope that doesn't happen. We mustn't let it happen, because a lot of the best campaigns begin at the grassroots on local newspapers, whether they're in the northeast of England or whether they're in other parts of the world. That's where it begins a lot of the time, because you know your communities, and we've got to maintain that. There's huge pressure, financial pressure on local newspapers all over the world, and in England that's no exception. But I really believe that journalism at the grassroots is vital to a healthy democracy, and we've got to maintain that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. When you look at the things that are lost, such as covering City Hall and what's happening in your community, it's tragic, really. And I learned that, I think it was 2 years ago, the first ever newspaper that I worked on, the Camrose Canadian in Alberta, was closed by one of the main publishers in Canada, Post Media, which, again, is very sad for that community. Now, did you go to the Northern Echo? Did you begin working there as a reporter, or did you immediately become editor? How did that unfold?
No. I went to the Northern Echo as a newly qualified senior reporter. So in journalism, you do about in those days, it was about 3 years training. So you're a trainee reporter, and I was a trainee reporter at Scunthorpe, and then I came to the Northern Echo after I passed my senior examinations to become a senior reporter. So I started as a reporter, and I made my way up through the news desk. I became the news editor of the paper, and then after being news editor, you then go into the executive ranks. So you become an assistant editor and then the deputy editor. I was acting editor of the Northern Echo for about 8 months when the editor left, the previous editor left. And after 8 months, I didn't get the job after being acting editor for 8 months. And that was a bit of a blow. But I went away. I was told that I needed to go and get more experience. And I went to a newspaper again in the northeast of England called the Hartlepool Mail. And I was the editor of the Hartlepool Mail. That was my first editorship. Stayed there for just over a year, and then the Northern Echo job came up again, and I got a phone call saying they wanted me to come back. And I became the editor of the paper in 1997, which was one of the proudest days of my life, I think, other than getting married and having my children, becoming the editor of the Northern Echo in 1999 it was, not 97. And I was just so proud, really, because it was such an institution. The Northern Echo meant so much. It was part of the fabric of the northeast of England. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a very special day for you. And of course, compared to today, the Northern Echo was such an important part of not just the local, but the regional community as well. It's a regional newspaper, or it was in its heyday when you took over. Tell our listeners what the circulation was back then and what the role of editor entailed, not just in the newsroom, but in the community as well.
Well, I think, we've got to remember, we've got to put it into context, because this was the 1980s. So there were no mobile phones, there were no computers. It was typewriters in those days. The Northern Echo was this incredible regional newspaper. Now, it covered an area which spans from Newcastle all the way down to York, which is about 80 miles apart. It covers a massive area for a local newspaper, and it had 7 editions in those days. To be as local as it possibly could be across such a big region, it had 7 editions. Well, there's only 1 edition now. There's a fraction of the staff, and it was a newspaper that tried to be local, regional and national. One of the most important statistics for me when I became the editor of the paper, when I did my research and looked into the stats around the readership, was that 7 out of 10 readers of the Northern Echo didn't buy a national newspaper. They expected their most important national news to still be in the Northern Echo. So we were everything from being right down to the grassroots of our local communities. We covered the big regional stories across the northeast of England. We covered Yorkshire as well, but we also made sure that we were a national newspaper as well. And that goes all the way back to the Northern Echo's history, really, because when the Northern Echo was born in 1870, it was born because it was the birthplace of the railways, and they realised that if they had a newspaper based in Darlington, it could be on sale all over the country. And the Northern Echo, I think, has a real, genuine claim to be Britain's first national newspaper because of that. And it maintained that kind of tradition for many, many years. And that's why I was attracted to it, because it had that kind of status, but also because it had this reputation for trying to make a difference.
And in trying to make a difference, one of the things that comes to mind for me is the campaigns that you spearheaded them and you steered them. Tell us about those campaigns, Pete, and any memorable ones that come to mind.
Well, I think the most important one, I mean, I was very lucky to be there for a long time, and I was also very lucky to have some brilliant journalists on my team. And, it would be wrong to not give people due credit for actually being the people who wrote those campaigns. So, I mean, the one I always talk about, and the one I think is the most important in my time, it was very close to home, actually, because it was a photographer on the Northern Echo called Ian Weir who very sadly died at the age of 38. And Ian was a good friend of mine, and I hadn't been the editor. I think I'd been editor for 6 months when Ian died at the age of 38. He was a father of 2. I'd known him, for years, and he died because he'd had a heart attack one morning. We were playing golf one morning and he didn't feel well. And he asked if he could stop playing golf. And he actually was having a heart attack. We didn't know it then, but he was having a heart attack. And he survived the heart attack, but he had some tests, and the tests showed that he needed a triple heart bypass urgently. And he then waited for news of when he would get his heart bypass operation, and he actually waited 8 months. And I was visiting him regularly as his boss. And when I was visiting him, I told him that I had a meeting coming up with Tony Blair, because Tony Blair was Prime Minister at the time, and we were the local newspaper for Tony Blair because his constituency, Sedgefield, was in the northeast of England. And I used to have regular meetings with Tony Blair in those days. And I said, look, I'm seeing Tony Blair next week. And he said, will you give him a letter from me? And he'd written a letter saying how scared he was about how long he'd waited already. I think it was 6 months at that time, waiting for news of when he would get his heart bypass operation. And I gave Tony Blair the letter, and I kept a copy of it. And 2 months later, I got a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning, which I'll never forget. It was from Ian's wife, Maggie. And she was very calm on the phone, saying that Ian had had another heart attack and the paramedics were at their house in Darlington. And she said, I think we've lost him. And by the time I got to the house that day, Ian was being declared dead in that family home. And it was surreal because he had 2 little boys called Joe and Charlie, and there was so much chaos in the house with paramedics and, you know, dealing with the body and everything. And I spent an hour playing basketball outside with the 2 boys, just getting them out of the way. And I remember Joe, who was his eldest son, saying to me, you know, we were playing basketball and he just stopped and he just said to me, Pete, has my dad died? And I said, I'm really sorry, Joe, but yeah, he has. And, you know, and I'll never forget that day is probably the most memorable day of my life in many ways, because it was just so incredibly sad. But after Ian's funeral, we decided we wanted to give the family the dignity of waiting for the funeral. But after the funeral, we absolutely went for the government, because he'd waited 8 months. And we had a brilliant health editor called Barry Nelson. And I said to Barry, look, I don't want you to do anything else. All I want you to do is concentrate on this campaign. I want you to find out how long people are waiting for heart bypass operations in other parts of Europe. And what we discovered was that the average waiting time in Britain was 12 months and the average waiting time across Europe was 3 months. Well, that got me angry. Why? Why were people waiting so long in a rich country like Britain for heart bypass operations? And they were dying. And Ian brought that story to life. And what I did was I published the copy of the letter that I'd given to Tony Blair on the front page. And it just went berserk, because we were the Prime Minister's local newspaper highlighting a scandal in the National Health Service. And to cut a very long story short, we campaigned and we campaigned and we campaigned, and it led to heart bypass operations, waiting times in Britain being cut from 12 months to 3 months. And the government publicly acknowledged it was down to the Northern Echo and the Ian Weir campaign. And I think as a journalist, there's nothing more important that you can do. A bit like Harold Evans in the 1960s with the cervical cancer campaign, you know, saving people's lives. And I know that campaign has saved lives for the past 20 years because it made a difference. It shamed the government into action. And that's the campaign that I'll always remember.
I mean, that's such a moving story, a very sad story, but again, powerful. It was your passion and probably, I have to say, anger as well that made that campaign successful and helped so many people.
Well, even now it's the 20th anniversary last year, and I went back I investigated it again. I'm a columnist for the Northern Echo now, and I wanted to know 20 years on, had it still made a difference? Had it slipped back? And I spoke to heart surgeons and whatever in the northeast, and I I was just so gratified to find out that 20 years on, they were saying to me that campaign is still making a difference. Even now, it transformed the way that the NHS dealt with coronary care in this country. And so it moves me even now, and I still get upset by it. It was such a shocking thing. To see your friend and, die. But I think it's a responsibility that journalists have when they see something that is wrong. You have got to do something about it. That to me is, we can report the news and absolutely we should do that. But I think we also have an absolute responsibility to put things right and put pressure on where we need to put pressure on. And, I'm talking about that day still with a lump in my throat now because, it is so incredibly sad that those two boys grew up without their dad. But I know that they find comfort in the fact that his death led to change that has saved other lives.
What was your next conversation with Tony Blair like after you ran that edition of the Northern Echo with that, including that letter?
Well, it was such a long time ago. I can't remember really. I mean, we always had a really good relationship with Tony Blair, and they were absolutely fine about it. They knew that something needed to be done. I mean, a lot of the discussions and the negotiations during the campaign were with Alan Milburn, who it was a really strange set of circumstances because Tony Blair was Prime Minister in Sedgefield, and the neighbouring constituency was Darlington, where the MP was a guy called Alan Milburn, and Alan Milburn just happened to be the Health Secretary. So it was kind of a perfect storm, really. We had this father of two, a young father of two, who died in these incredibly tragic circumstances, and two neighbouring constituencies in our heartland. One MP was the Prime Minister and one MP was the Health Secretary. But I mean, I have to give Alan Milburn huge credit because, he responded in exactly the right way. Yes, he had the local newspaper banging on about it. That inspired huge national coverage. I mean, the Daily Mail, I remember the Daily Mail front page lead was the father who didn't need to die. So the government was under a huge pressure, which was kicked off by the Northern Echo. But to give them their due, they put it right. They launched the first ever national framework for coronary care in this country, and heart bypass waiting times were cut from 12 months to 3 months. Well, fair enough. It was wrong. They put it right, and that to me is the right way. A local newspaper voiced something that was terrible, and a government responded. I'd like to think that in a democracy that will happen again and again and again, that local newspapers highlight things that are wrong in their communities and say this has to change. You would hope that governments listen.
Of course, yeah. I mean, that's one of the biggest campaigns that you oversaw, and you had many others as well. And you also oversaw the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day production of the news in the Northern Echo. Now, I was aware as well that you did a lot of other things in the community, didn't you? What kind of things were they, and how did they kind of raise your profile?
Well, I always believed that an editor of a newspaper had to be absolutely immersed in the local community. So right from the beginning, I wanted to make sure that I was known, that I was involved. And a lot of it, to be honest, was I got onto the local speaking circuit. And I think that this is something that is really important for editors. Speaking to, whether it's the Women's Institute or the local Rotary Club or, business groups, whatever it was, I got on the speaking circuit. Now, if you take an institution like the Women's Institute, there are hundreds and hundreds of branches of the Women's Institute in local communities. And I just got involved in going out to meet them, talk to them, have a cup of tea afterwards. I also became a member of various partnerships, which were like economic partnerships, talking about how to improve the prosperity of local communities. I got involved in various charities, but what it did was not only raise the profile of the paper and raise my own personal profile, but it was a real education for me, because even in the days of social media, I hear people say, well, it's all done through social media now. And, social media is without doubt, a great tool for building relationships. But I absolutely believe you will never be able to substitute the relationships that you build face to face with people and getting out there. Because over a cup of tea with the WI, what you get real feedback, what they like, what they don't like, what they think is good about the paper, what's important to them. And over, I think the first 7 years of my editorship, I was considering whether to turn the paper tabloid. It was a broadsheet in those days, and it convinced me that feedback, that grassroots feedback from the local community, really made me feel this paper has to become, if it's going to have a future, a long-term future, it has to be tabloid. We called it compact then, because tabloid was seen as a bit of a sort of down market word. So the word compact was adopted, but really we changed the shape and the size of the paper, and it's that kind of thing. But by going out and being part of the community, I understood, I hope I understood much more accurately what readers wanted.
And of course, in addition to the healthcare campaigns and the fact that you met with the WI, as you said, you were involved in many other things. I mean, I can remember there was a campaign, or you were very active around Darlington Football Club at one point, maybe in the early 2000s. Was the club about to leave Darlington? I can't remember the details.
No, well, it was just going bust. Darlington Football Club was quite a low league football club, but nevertheless a very important part of the local community. And it went bust, basically. And, I think as a part of the local community, you've got to try and do what you can to raise money. So we were very much part of the campaign to save Darlington Football Club from going into liquidation. I remember even at a time when we were having difficult financial challenges at the paper. I think the staff hadn't had a pay rise that year, and maybe the year before, I can't remember now, but we still gave a cheque for £10,000 to the local football club, because they were part of the community, and so were we, and we supported their campaign. And and I think there was another example of that kind of fundraising, the importance of a local newspaper being the catalyst for fundraising. I remember when Princess Diana died in 1997, she died. And I think I was acting editor at that time. And when she died, we'd been carrying a lot of stories in the paper about how the northeast of England was the only region in England that didn't have a children's hospice. And they'd laid the foundations for a children's wing at the Butterwick Hospice, which is in a place called Stockton-on-Tees, but they'd run out of money. And when Diana died, and there was that wave of emotion around the country, hysteria really, we said at the Northern Echo, look, this is an opportunity to launch a campaign to build that children's hospice. And we launched an appeal in Diana's memory to build a children's hospice, and so much money was raised, hundreds of thousands of pounds was raised by that appeal, and the children's hospice was built as a result of that. And what that taught me was, one, people are really generous when you touch their hearts and they can see a real need, and if they're galvanised by the local newspaper. But also it showed me that there is good news can almost always be found in bad news. When there's a tragedy, when something goes wrong, like the Ian Weir story that I talked about, terrible tragedy, I always used to think, well, what can we do? as a result of that bad news to turn it into something positive. And I think building a children's hospice was another great positive outcome of a terrible tragedy. You know, the loss of Princess Diana was a huge story, you know, across the world, not just in England. But a children's hospice was built as a result.
Yeah, that's you know, as you said, you got some good out of something that really affected and upset a lot of people. And, you know, with all this kind of the conversation so far, we've talked about everything that you've achieved in your profile, kind of leading to this role that you have as an ambassador for what's called the Darlington Building Society. It's a financial institution, and I'm aware there'll be lots of listeners who don't know what a building society is. It's like a bank, isn't it? Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the roles that, you know, when I left the Northern Echo, I launched my own business, Peter Barron Media, and I always describe it as it's like jumping out of an aeroplane and not knowing whether the parachute was going to open. But I launched a business, and I was lucky because I'd been around such a long time and I had a high profile. I got a number of offers to get involved in various things involving the media, and one of them was Darlington Building Society. And as you say, Darlington Building Society, a building society is a kind of bank, but it's a mutual, which means that it's owned by and run for the benefit of members, savers, borrowers, because it doesn't have any shareholders' interest to satisfy. The profits are put back into the society for the benefit of members. And what I loved about Darlington Building Society was that, you know, even now, all the way through its history, it's been part of the community. It believes in the localness of its services, and 5% of all its profits are given back out in grants to a huge range of good causes in the community. And the chief executive of the Building Society, who I knew, contacted me and said, "Look, would you be interested in getting involved with us and putting your name to Darlington Building Society?" Well, it was a kind of no-brainer for me because, you know, this was a really well-respected local institution with a very positive ethos and very community-minded. So why would I not get involved? And it was a paid-for role as well, so it was part of my business. But what it meant was that they wanted me to be their community ambassador. We're launching a program, an ambassador program. The idea was that they were going to have a number of community ambassadors to represent them, not be directly employed by them, but represent them in the community. And I was the first one to be signed up. And it was because of that, all that work that I'd done as editor over however many years, of getting out and about and talking to the women's institutes and building up those relationships and that public profile. And that's what attracted the Building Society. You know, I started working for them as a community ambassador, and I have been now for the past 3 years.
So lots of organizations, people in marketing and communications are keen on ambassador programs because, you know, they really help build up a brand from the grassroots level. So tell us a little bit about what you've done to date, Pete, and how well it's gone. What have you been up to as an ambassador?
Well, I mean, it's quite a wide-ranging role, really, because, I mean, you know, the overall objective is to be a representative of Darlington Building Society in the community. So, for example, if I go and if I'm attending an event, or if I'm comparing an event, so I compare a lot of events, and I'm still a public speaker. So, for example, every year there is a junior Eurovision song contest in Darlington, involving all the local primary schools, and they all represent a different country and sing a song. I compare that event, and it touches hundreds and hundreds of families, but I compare it as the Darlington Building Society ambassador. So that's just one example. As I said, they give 5% of their profits back to local good causes. So I get to present checks to those community groups. So it might be £5,000 that they're being awarded as part of that community grant making initiative. I go and present the check. I'm a representative of the building society in a very, very positive way. And it's worked really well. I've really enjoyed it. It's a nice thing to do, to give people money.
I can imagine, yeah.
I like seeing people smile, and Darlington Building Society makes a lot of people smile because it's giving a lot of money away every year, and that's a nice thing for me to do.
Mm. And one thing that we didn't touch on when we were chatting earlier is the fact that you're a well-known children's author, and I believe those books came from your column Dad at Large, which was and still is one of my favourite columns because it's so funny.
Well, thank you.
Tell us a bit about your books and then the how that's kind of dovetailed with your role as ambassador.
Yeah, well, I started writing the books. The Dad at Large column it's about family life and the funny things that you do when you're a dad, and it's written unashamedly from the point of view of a dad, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek in the sense that it kind of pretends that dads have a much harder time than mums, which I know isn't true, but it's written in that kind of vein. And the children say the most funny things, and you get yourself into so many funny situations in family life. So I started writing that column. My eldest son is 29 now, and I wrote it initially when he was born, so nearly 30 years ago. The column's now called Grandad at Large because I've got a little granddaughter now. So I've been writing that column for a long time. Those columns were turned into a series of books. That encouraged me then to write some children's books. I write a series of books called The Monstrous Morals, which are rhyming books about children that get into bad habits, whether it's they don't brush their teeth or they don't tidy their bedroom or they pick their nose, whatever it might be. There are 7 Monstrous Morals books out there. And then when I joined Darlington Building Society as their ambassador, they came up with this brilliant idea, which was asking me to write a children's book around a little character called Darlie the Train. And Darlie the Train is named after Darlington, obviously, but he's the representative, he's the symbol of a junior savings account that Darlington Building Society has, which they launched. And the idea is that children launch their own little savings account and they get a money box in the form of a Darlie train. And when they save so much money, they get carriages to attach to the train. And it's a brilliant, very simple, but very brilliant idea. And Darlie the Train had been created. And Darlington Building Society said to me, could you bring him to life in a children's book? Which was just a fantastic commission to have. And I wrote a book called Darlie's Magical History Ride. And it is a story about this little train who takes a group of children on a trip to the seaside as a reward for them raising some money for children, poor children. And they go to the seaside on Darlie the Train, but on the way they go through a series of enchanted tunnels. And every time they go through a tunnel, they go back in time and they meet characters from history. So they meet World War I soldiers, and then the railway pioneers, and then Henry VIII and Roman centurions, and it all ends with them meeting dinosaurs. And this book was written and published, and it is now something that is used as a marketing tool to promote the Darlington Building Society Junior account. But it's led on to all sorts of other things. Because I now go into schools as a literacy ambassador. So I do a reading of Darlie on a big screen. and the children all get to dress up as the historical characters. And we have a whale of a time because they're all dressing up as dinosaurs or Henry VIII or Roman centurions or whatever it is. And as we go through the story, they play the parts. And it's just a great way of building a bridge between a financial institution and a whole new market, this younger generation that will become their customers now and in the future. And it also obviously builds relationships with their parents and their grandparents, because it's a great thing to do. Open up a junior account for your children. They get a book, they get a train, and I'm going into schools and just building these relationships, which is just great fun.
It sounds like great fun. It must be fun to watch as well. And of course, from a marketing point of view, it's not heavy-handed marketing, and it's really about giving a lot to the children, isn't it? Because you're teaching them about history as well.
Oh, well, yeah. Not only teaching them about history, but also we then go on to do literacy workshops where we talk about stories, and they have to. They what they do is they break up into pairs and they work together as pairs on coming up with ideas for what will happen in book 2, what will Darley's next adventure be? And they have to imagine, they have to use their imaginations and think about what might happen next. And the children have got the most amazing imaginations if you unlock them, and they come up with these brilliant ideas. And hopefully somewhere down the line, Darley's Magical History Tour book 2 will be out, and a lot of it will have been inspired by the children in those sessions. So they're getting to use their imagination, they're having fun, and it's in the name of Darlington Building Society, which I think is a wonderful thing. Yes, it is a commercial initiative, but it's a commercial initiative by an institution that believes in the community and pumps its profits back into the community. So I'm really comfortable with it, and I just think it's playing a really, really important role. And it's developing all the time, because the plan for 2020 is to use that bridge that Darley has built between the Building Society and the local school community, and then start launching financial education sessions as well to teach children about the importance of financial responsibility, of debt, how to get a mortgage, all those things. So it's literacy, it's numeracy, it's making children have a better understanding of the world, and it's being done in the name of a building society.
That's really worthwhile, isn't it, Pete? Because, you hear so many people say, oh, I learned this and that in school, but I didn't learn how to write a check or manage my bank account.
Absolutely. And I would put myself in that category. I'm useless with money. And I wish I'd had those kind of sessions and those lessons. The schools love it, because they're getting this kind of supplementary support in education. If I go into a school, I can be there all morning, and it's helping the schools deliver curriculum priorities, whether it's literacy or whether it's it's finance. There's an appetite from schools. Can you come in and can you deliver these sessions? So I think it's been really positive, and I think it can only grow.
And of course, it's not just in Darlington, is it? Because I noticed that the Building Society has branches, I think, in Redcar and Stockton, so it's across that small region, yeah?
Oh, it has 9 branches across the northeast, so it has a wide reach. So yeah, we're going into schools right across the region, and what's really lovely is that the managers of each of those branches also has a responsibility to work with me and identify which schools that we're going to go into. So they're getting involved in the community as well, working with me, having fun. I went to a branch managers meeting just before Christmas to talk about the development of the new financial workshops. And they were having a meeting, and we went through a a session as we would in a primary school. I got them all dressing up in the historical costumes. They played the roles. These are grown-ups. They had a whale of a time. But I wanted them to understand how it works, how you engage children, because it's not easy always to engage children. But by doing it in a fun, imaginative, creative way, you can really make a lot of progress. And I think I wanted them to understand it firsthand. So they had to go back in time themselves. They had to become children again and dress up as Roman centurions and dinosaurs.
And what you touched on there, you talked about kind of one of your responsibilities is to meet up with the branch managers. So it sounds as though on the side of Darlington Building Society, there's a lot of planning and preparation going into the ambassador role that you have. Do you know anything about that planning or what happens in the Building Society to help you with your role? And can you share that with our listeners?
Well, I think what's been really important is that we have a quarterly meeting. So the marketing team, the PR company that they have a PR company as well employed called Harvey and Hugo, who look after their PR. So, and then me as the community ambassador. So we all get together and we just talk about what's happening in the society. We have ideas about how we can develop different projects and products. And it's a really creative environment when people get together. And I have to, in those meetings, I have to talk about what I've done, where have I been, which schools have we touched upon. And those sessions come up with progress and how we're going to develop the idea. And so the idea of taking the literacy workshops into sort of financial workshops came from those kind of quarterly marketing creative meetings. And I think that's really, really important that you if you're going to have an ambassador program, you don't just let it happen and let it drift, but get back together and assess it, review it, think about how it can be better. And I think Darlington Building Society has been really good at that.
And how does the Building Society measure the success of what you're doing?
Well, I mean, I suppose the obvious measure is how many junior accounts they're selling. And I don't know the figures. I don't know the exact figures, but I know that the junior accounts are going really well and are very popular. And I think some of the success is put down to the creativity around the book. And all the school visits that we've been doing. So that's a measure. But I suppose it's difficult. It's a bit like, how do you measure the value of an editor going out into the community and talking to women's institutes? Does it have an impact on newspaper sale? If it does, how would you measure it? It's a really difficult thing to do. And I think to some extent, the role with the Building Society is similar, because you're going out there and you're promoting the name of Darlington Building Society. I mean, Darlington Building Society is in very good shape, and it is growing year on year. So you hope that what you're doing is making a contribution to that growth.
And I'm sure there must be a lot of feedback on what you're doing and the activities that you're involved in, yeah?
Well, we get really good feedback from the schools. The schools love it. And you know that something's successful. For example, the whole story writing concept, that led on to an idea, again, from going back to the marketing meetings that I was talking about. One of the ideas that came out of those marketing meetings was that why don't we launch a story writing competition for children? So last year we launched a story writing competition for children, promoted it through the Northern Echo. We had them as a media partner. We had a local radio station as a media partner. And on the back of the success of the book, we launched that competition. And one of the marketing slogans that Darlington Building Society has adopted is It's called Big On, so it's like big on education, big on community,
Okay.
big on saving, whatever it might be. So big on education, it fitted really well with big on education. So we launched a story writing competition for schools, and the idea was that they had to write 500 words. There was a category for primary school children and a category for secondary school children. They had to begin their story with the words "little did I know." ... And then that led to something big happening in their story, big on education. And hundreds, I think the first year we got something like 400 entries for the competition. We had 6 finalists. The finalists came to... they had to read their stories at the local theatre, on stage at the local theatre, in front of a panel of professional authors as the judges. And the prize was the children themselves got their own heighting books. So the taller the more books they got. But also they won £500 worth of books for their local schools. And that's a lot of books for the local school library. So £500 for the primary school, £500 for the secondary school, and that goes towards what's called I should have said earlier, really, the Darley Foundation. All the profits from all the book sales, any sales that we get of the book, all of that goes into the Darley Foundation, and that money is used to buy books for schools in deprived areas. So everywhere you turn, the whole project is helping to educate children and get them reading, which I just think is such an important thing for children to read and use their imagination and be inspired. And it's happening through this idea of using a children's character in a book to promote a financial account at a local building society. But it's grown and grown, and I just think it's been a brilliant idea and a great success.
So it really embraces some important and very fundamental values, doesn't it? There's nothing more important than a child getting a good education to set them up for success in life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a lot of planning that goes on behind within the building society. You attend meetings, that kind of thing. It's pretty structured and well organized. But on a more personal level, Pete, and I know that you touched on this, you said it's fun giving out money and when you have to, that kind of thing. But what do you get from being an ambassador? How does it feel to you?
Well, I think it's good for me. Well, first of all, it's good for me because it's part of my business, so I earn money as a result of it. And I make no apology for that, because I'm in a position now where I'm a freelance. I have to earn a living. But as you said, I'm very comfortable with it. I'm in a position now where I don't have to suffer fools anymore. I can pick and choose who I want to work for. And I'm really proud to work for Darlington Building Society because they are very, very community-minded. They're very ethical. They're putting profits back into the local community. So for me, I think it's really good fun. I believe in what I'm doing. I want to play a role in, getting children reading, inspiring them to read, because I've had a great life because of my love of the written word, and it's taken me to, all sorts of places, and I wouldn't have swapped that. So if I can inspire children to read and then write themselves and hopefully become authors themselves in the future, or journalists or editors or whatever that might be, I get a huge amount of satisfaction from that. So in some ways, it's not work. It's great fun and it's enormous satisfaction. But I also think it also helps me to, I'm no longer the editor of the Northern Echo. I haven't been the editor of the Northern Echo for 4 years now. And it's important for me as a somebody who's trying to run a media company to be involved still in the community. So it's a reason for me to go out into the community still, and I think that's good for my business.
Yeah, of course, that's great. So a great opportunity for you, and I know that you really love children as well. So it must be lovely for you to be in those classrooms with those little kids.
Oh, it's a hoot. It really is a hoot. I mean, when you have hundreds of kids in an assembly, and everybody wants to be the dinosaur. You ask for volunteers to get involved, and everybody. I have a dinosaur costume, and I make them. So many hands go up, and they have to do an audition, which is they have to roar as loudly as possible and be as scary as possible, because when the dinosaur appears, he appears from out of the foliage and the undergrowth and all that, and he has to burst out of the forest, and he has to be scary. So they have to audition. It's just great fun. I look forward to, if I get a booking from a school to go in, I really look forward to it, because it's just great fun. You turn into a kid yourself again, which is no bad thing.
No, of course not. It's lots of fun and it's healthy. Just quickly before we kind of close, I think there were a couple of important questions, and I know that we kind of discussed this before, and this is important for our listeners, but I'd like to ask you, Pete, what key tips would you give to an organisation that's setting up an ambassador program?
Well, I think the first thing really is that you've got to be very selective, I think, in terms of who you ask to be your ambassador. You've got to make sure that they are going to add value to your organisation. I think there is a temptation sometimes to say, we'll have that person as ambassador, but what are they going to do for you? Be selective and understand what they're going to deliver. So I think that's one of the things that I would say is really important. And then I think to make sure that there is an accountability around it as well. So like I said, having those creative meetings where you are looking back and looking forward, I think they're really important. So it's not just allowed to drift. Be clear about what you want the ambassadors to do. Think about the areas where they can really add value. What are their strengths and their skills? I would be rubbish at delivering the financial workshops, so that's not my strength. And I think when you're putting an ambassador program together, think about the team. How is the team going to come together so that they complement each other? People have different strengths. It's a bit like a newsroom. When I was the editor of the Northern Echo, I wasn't the best person at anything, really. There were better people than me at different areas of the job, whether it was design or whether it was politics or whether it was business or whatever. Have a team that is going to come together. And I think it's the same with an ambassador program. Make sure you've got people in that kind of ambassadorial squad that have got different strengths and can meet your objectives together.
Those are really important points. Thanks, Pete. And so for someone who might be asked to be an ambassador or even would like to be, what things should that individual consider?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure that you're comfortable with the ethos of the organisation you're representing. I mean, like I said, I am very, very comfortable with working for Darlington Building Society because it's ethical, it's caring, it's community minded. Now, I wouldn't be comfortable being an ambassador for a loan shark or whatever it might be, but Darlington Building Society is a very easy fit. So I think if you're going to be an ambassador, then ask yourself how comfortable you are representing that company. And it's a no-brainer with Darlington Building Society. I think be proactive in suggesting how your involvement can grow. I'm never comfortable just sitting back and waiting to be asked to do things. I want to suggest things and add as much value as I can. So be proactive, I think, is really important. And I think the other thing I would say is really, you've got to keep up to date with developments within that organisation. If you're going to be an ambassador for an organisation, know what it stands for, know where it's going, what's its direction, what are its values, what developments is it about to announce, so that you're a bit of an expert on that organisation, really. And I think if you're going to be paid to be a community ambassador, then the least that you can do is do your homework on that organisation. But I think the other thing, and I think what's been so successful about what we've done at Darlington Building Society, and it's advice for both the organisation and the person becoming the ambassador, is be prepared to be creative, think differently. The idea of doing a children's book as a marketing tool, I'll be honest, I hadn't thought of that. But I'll tell you what, it is so powerful and is proved to be so powerful. So be creative, and you will be amazed at what you can do.
And of course, for some people, a children's book would kind of like frighten them. They might think, oh my God, I can't write. So play with your strengths. And you just mentioned that, yeah.
There will be people out there, wherever you are, who can do that for you. It's about knowing who's out there. It goes back to me saying, choose your ambassadors well. What skills have they got? Because writing a children's book, if that's something that you decide to do in your organisation, and why not? I mean, I know of at least one, I probably shouldn't name them, but one major national brand that picked up on what we'd done at Darlington Building Society and launched a children's book as a direct result, and picked my brains about it. And then on the pretense that I was going to get the job to write the book, and then after picking my brains, they decided that they would do it internally, which was a bit annoying, but there you go. So I know that there are people out there looking at what's happened here. And, I always think, when I was the editor of the paper, I always stole good ideas unashamedly. If you see a good idea in another newspaper, steal it, adapt it, use it. Now, there is no monopoly on good ideas. So look, if you see a good idea, and I do think that what Darlington Building Society has done is a really good idea, then, why not steal it? Go and do your own children's book. And I'd be more than happy to hear from anybody who wants a book writing.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to be the author of as many children's books as you want to throw at me.
I mean, it's such a worthy thing to do. So, Pete, we've covered so much in this episode. It's been fantastic. And I've got absolutely no doubt that listeners in certain industries will want to set up an ambassador program and know about your experience. So how can they reach you? I'm easily found, to be honest. My company's called Peter Barron Media. I'm
based in Darlington in the northeast of England. So if you just Google me, you will find me. I've got a website, which is peterbarronmedia.com, and I'm available on email as well at peter@peterbarronmedia.com. So I'm more than happy to, if somebody wants to pick my brains about what I've done on behalf of Darlington Building Society or anybody else, really, just please get in touch. It's not a problem. I'd love to hear from you.
That will be great. And I'm sure people will be in touch. And it's been great reconnecting with you after all these years. Thank you so much for having the time, Pete.
It's a great pleasure. Nice to talk to you, Sheila.
Thank you. Take care, Pete.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.